I was thinking how the sentient minds of sentient beings are so completely clouded by confusion. We, sometimes we doubt what we say, we doubt whether we should have said what we said, did what we did. And we suffer so much just questioning ourselves. So we have this confusion that arises from grasping at things as being truly existent, as being permanent. Or sometimes we have the opposite. We think we are so very, very right that we don't even question our opinion, our view, our action. And that kind of mind also is deeply confused, but doesn't know it. And so you have the kind of actions that we have seen on the news this week of people marching in the street with torches, believing they are so right and being so clearly confused. So when we step back and look at all the ways that our minds are confused, just our very own, we can see how much we suffer unnecessarily as a result of that confusion. And absolutely nothing but compassion can arise. Because of our misperception of the way things are, we grasp, we believe in our hallucinations, and we have so much suffering. And so, how fortunate we are that we have met the Buddha's teachings. That to whatever extent we understand them at this point, we've heard something that says, question. Question, do things exist the way they appear? Is what your mind telling you absolutely the truth? Unchanging, monolithic, independent of any other phenomena? Is that really true? We have the opportunity to begin to question how things work, to understand how our misperceptions create our afflictions, which create our experience, really. Both in how we act in the moment, and then also the karma that we experience as a result of those actions in the past. How fortunate and how extraordinary, actually, that we have a chance to even wonder about this. And because we have a chance to wonder, our compassion can arise for ourselves and for everyone completely trapped by the confusion of our distorted minds. And so let's hold that thought of compassion in our minds tonight as we go forward in studying the 6 far-reaching attitudes. Wishing to free ourselves from the suffering of our own condition here, the karma and afflictions. And seeing how everyone is just like us, being tossed by their karma and afflictions. Letting our compassion grow and reach out to every being, wishing them all to be free. And recognizing that as long as we have this confusion in our mind, we can't do much to help. But we can take the opportunity we have in this life, in this moment, to purify our minds, to transform them, to study the Buddha's teachings, to set our sights firmly on liberation and complete awakening, so that with a completely clear, wise, omniscient, fully compassionate mind, we have everything necessary to relieve all beings from that unnecessary suffering. So let's hold that as our motivation tonight. So everyone online, good evening. We've had a very full week and a very full day. And when it came down to the end of the day, there was a call for volunteers to do this group tonight, and I'm the one. But everybody's going to participate. So the last couple of weeks, we've had very nice teachings on the launching into the practices of bodhisattvas, how to cultivate the mind, and what to do once we have cultivated the mind of bodhicitta. So last week and the week before, too, we touched on the first of the far-reaching practices of generosity, or now we're calling them the perfection of generosity. And so this week we're going to move on to ethical conduct. So ethical conduct is restraining from non-virtue. Or really, why are we restraining from non-virtue? Ethical conduct is restraining from harm. Fundamentally, basically, it's refraining from harming other living beings and then also engaging in the virtuous actions that are the counter to the actions that are destructive. So, just to review a little bit, put everything in context, this term far-reaching or perfection or paramita of the 6 paramitas, the second one is what we're going to look at tonight. It has the connotation of going beyond cyclic existence to the safe shore of Buddhahood. Why is that a safe shore? Because once we have complete awakening, we have no more delusions, no more confusion in the mind at all. Both obscurations have been eliminated. So the afflictive obscurations as well as the cognitive obscurations. There's nothing we do not know, nothing we cannot see. And because we've focused and developed our compassion to such an extent over such a period of time, we're compulsively able to benefit others. That's all a Buddha actually can do. They don't have any choice. That's an amazing thought to me. To just have no choice but to do that. So the method for attaining that is these 6 far-reaching practices. So it's also far-reaching because it's motivated by bodhicitta. We don't leave a single person out. And it's far-reaching because it's practiced with wisdom. And so in its perfected form, it does reach out to every single living being throughout all realms of space. In its perfected form, it's done with a wisdom that understands the nature of reality perfectly. But in order to get there, we have to do it as best we can with our ordinary minds. So we practice the far-reaching practices with the sentient beings that we can, and we practice it with the wisdom that we can muster. And so probably that's the level we're talking about tonight. Maybe that's the level we're talking about for our whole rest of this life even. But knowing that there is a broader way of practicing, a wider, more expansive way, and that's the direction we're heading, I think helps us to keep expanding our capacity right now, as we expand our mind. One of the benefits of practicing this perfection of ethical conduct is what? Like number one for us ordinary beings. Yes. Our minds can rest easy. Yes, that helps. Yeah, our minds can rest easy. So we're not tormented by our doubts and questions about what we've done, what's right, what's wrong. We're clear about we're clear about what is a right action, quote, right action, what is a helpful action, and what is a harmful action. We get to discern that more clearly. But the long-term benefit of that is that this is the fundamental principal way that we gain a human life. It's the principal cause of getting another rebirth as a human being. And so, no matter where we are in our Dharma practice, in order for it to become a Dharma practice, we have to at least have the motivation to be working for a good rebirth. Why are we looking for a good rebirth when liberation and enlightenment are so tantalizingly out there as our motivations? Because in order to achieve liberation and enlightenment, we need a succession of good rebirths, precious human rebirths, in fact, so that we can practice lifetime after lifetime after lifetime after lifetime to purify our minds. So that's a great motivator. If we start to think about the value of future lives, it's a great motivator for practicing this overarching practice of ethical conduct. So, principally, when we talk about these, we talk about the 10 pathways of non-virtue and refraining from them, and the 10 virtuous pathways and cultivating them. And we have talked a lot about these in the last year, I think. I think we've had Venerable Tarpa make us recite them many times to make sure we have them memorized. So one of the things that Venerable suggested is that we look at these in terms of how to practice them in contemporary, not to practice them, how to refrain from practicing them in our contemporary life. It's an interesting theory. And Venerable Damcho sent me the text of a talk that she had given in Singapore about practicing ethical conduct in modern life. Her thesis was, it actually is easier to create non-virtue these days than it was back in the day. So I think it's interesting to even play with that idea. Is that really true? Sentient beings are still sentient beings. We haven't evolved that much in 2,500 years, say, since the Buddha taught these. Sentient beings still have the same afflictions. We still have the same bodily actions. The same 10 apply in terms of negative actions. So what do you think? Is it easier to create non-virtue today than it was, say, at the Buddha's time? I see nodding heads. Nodding heads. Yes? Tell me why.
The first thing that popped into my mind is that we have so much access to anonymous social media that we can get involved with very negative communication, etc., and easily create a lot of non-virtue.
I think the technology of warfare and just fighting is like, if you think about the Buddha's time, what do they have, like catapulting rocks or something? I don't know what they had. As far as you could go, as far as you could shoot an arrow, maybe.
Yeah.
Or I don't know what they had back then, but it wasn't like what they have now. I know I've heard stories of the Buddha's time. His whole family and village, that kingdom got destroyed in his lifetime. But they weren't like, they didn't have bombs, they didn't have guns, they didn't have nuclear bombs, they didn't have submarines, they didn't have all the stuff we have now, so that you could only go so far.
Yeah.
They didn't use chemical weapons. I'm sure people got poisoned, but it wasn't like the massive stuff that can happen now. So just the scope of your negativity would have been more limited.
Yeah. Venerable.
I was thinking of something a little more contemporary, the changes that even we've seen in our lifetime, and that is that the nuclear family, the emphasis of family has changed a lot, at least in the West, and I think in the East too. And so there's not as much social pressure, say, from pleasing your family and living up to family norms and those sort of things, but also recently there's a breakdown of religious structures as well, in terms of where people are looking for their happiness, their sense of identity, and where they get their ethics.
Yeah.
You know, it seems like where do children learn ethics now? A lot of them aren't getting it in their home, and they're not getting it at Sunday school. So, you know, that leaves school, and I wonder if they're getting any there.
Yeah, good point.
Yeah. In relation to that, I used to teach high school, and what boggled my mind was how easy it is to get things like pornography on your cell phone. Like, children would be circulating pornographic videos on their phone. Like, and as teachers, we were totally not even having this conversation with them about what are the ethics of that, or what is healthy sexuality in an age where pornography is available at one click.
Yeah,
And people are exposed to it, and no one's talking about how to work with that.
yeah. Also, with the phone age, I just saw this study that a psychologist has actually measured what we already kind of intuitively know, but this tendency towards communicating by text has increased the level of depression in teenagers in particular. It's now like she has a study, there's the significant number that shows that that these kinds of confidence building, relationship building interactions, human to human, have fallen down, and that somebody, I think it was it Brian, was telling me that even your brothers and sisters will text you if you're in the same house, right? Yeah, and we've had a school psychologist, counselor, who also tells us that her parents have come and said, you know, my child will only talk to me when she texts. She'll come home from school, I'll say, how are you doing? She'll say, fine, and then she'll go in her bedroom and text me the whole horrible thing that happened to her that day, but she will not tell me face to face. So this breakdown of person-to-person communication, I think, follows up on what you're saying too.
I think also, too, that the media, because we don't have the face-to-face, I think that the divisive speech and the harsh speech and the lying has also been exacerbated, because you can make up and say horrible things about people through time and space, and you don't have to look at them face-to-face as you say cruel things about them and defame them and bully them and do anything. You can just put it out there and let all your friends know. You know, there's something, the anonymity
of it
makes it easier.
Yeah.
Also, there used to be a shared sense of news, and now there's whatever news accords with your beliefs. And so, following what she said, what Venerable said, it's so much easier just to put out falsities, clear and blatant falsities, and then just keep repeating them. And some people will follow them and think they're true.
Right.
So in addition to that, violence has become entertainment, in that kids film themselves doing violent acts and then they post it thinking that it's a great thing. Or people use the media as a forum for violence to spread their message, to attract people, like we've seen lately. So it's definitely an increase in that type of behavior.
So let's go through the 10 non-virtues and talk about this in this kind of broader perspective. And I don't want us to hang there, because it's easy to just listen to this barrage of like, and go, oh my gosh, what kind of world are we living in, and get really depressed. It's not the point of tonight's teaching. That's not the point of the Buddha's teaching. But I think it is extremely useful. I will have to say, well, I heard an excellent talk yesterday by a man named Michael Eric Dyson, who was speaking on white privilege. And part of his talk was, to you white liberals, we have to look at what we've been unwilling to look at. And we have to own what we've been unwilling to own if we really want to participate in creating a society where there is equity, love, compassion, and distributed equally to all. And so I think for especially, I mean, I don't do much social media. But it's really important, I think, for me to understand what's happening in the broader society so that we can look to what are the resources we have in the Dharma to cultivate our own practice, which is the only thing we really can change, but also then how to use our own practice in a positive way to really think about how to bring the Buddha's qualities of those 10 virtuous actions into everyday life in a public way. So I'd like to go there before we end tonight. But I think it's useful to look at all of these kind of big pictures, like, wow, this is, maybe Venerable's thesis was correct. It's easier to create non-virtue these days than it was 2,500 years ago. Same humans, same afflictions, bigger toys.
Can I add one more thing?
Yeah.
We also live in degenerate times, and one of the aspects of degenerate times is the afflictions are more rampant and stronger.
Yeah, that is as they say. And one of the qualifications of the degenerate times, too, is that then where virtue is practiced, it is powerful. Right? That's also true. So, and that's important to remember. That is really important to remember when we talk about the degenerate times. I'm glad you brought it up, because people reference that sometimes, and it gets a little like, yeah. But because of that, then the virtue that we create is great. Yes.
I'd like to hear the other side of the argument, because I think someone could make a case that, well, I've read statistics like the world is safer now than it ever has been. Less people are murdered or and I mean, nowadays there's things like human rights, the concept of human rights. That's a recent invention in human history. Most countries outlaw killing. Back in the Buddha's time, I mean, it was probably okay to kill, the enemy clan or caste or tribe or whatever. Animal rights are making a headway, and nobody probably thought twice back then. And I mean, covetousness, maliciousness, and wrong views have been around forever, and that's actually what's driving all these non-virtues.
Yeah, good point.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to hear the other side.
Very good point. Yes.
I was thinking a similar thing of just like even, dog fighting, cockfighting, the gladiator that kind of stuff. Like, it's just thinking like what socially acceptable forms were there of harming that might not be present now, but we're just doing it in a different form, like the bullying that takes place over using the phones and stuff, whereas before, they'd have the Colosseum and just have it as play.
Yeah, that's true.
The bit mentioned about a kid not being able to tell her mother what happened at school until she was able to text her. 30 years ago, she might have just went home and went in her room and never told her mother.
That's
that
true.
might be the only forum that she has to do that. She might be something that she wasn't going to say face to face, even if she otherwise.
Yeah, also true. Also true. And then, too, that case, the Nobel laureate named Robert, who pointed out before we were about to go bomb Iraq, and he was speaking to a group of people who were horrified, and he said, no, he said, yes, it's terrible that war is about to happen, but look, millions of people around the world are protesting this bombing. This has never happened in the history of the world, he said. So, good point. Other side of the coin. So in the big picture, and His Holiness always responds to people when they say, how can we deal with the terrible situation of the world? His Holiness says, I don't agree. And then he lays out the kindness of others, one by one by one. He lays out, think about how it is that so many people around the world are being cared for by healthcare professionals, for example, or their illnesses are being tended to, or children are being tucked safely into bed by kind and loving parents. And think about really person by person the kindness of other living beings. So he always answers that in that way. But our point here is, how is it that we can practice non-virtue? Yes, how can we practice non-virtue more easily than perhaps in the past? And being aware of that, how can we personally make sure that we are practicing the virtuous practices that we wish to in order to develop this perfection of ethics in order to be able to actually someday be of great benefit to peace? So let's go through one by one. So this first one of the non-virtuous pathway of killing, taking the life of another being intentionally. So I don't think any of us are intentionally going out killing human beings. Maybe we're not even going out intentionally killing animals. Maybe we've even stopped swatting mosquitoes. I have a question about how we're practicing this if we cling to our guns. Like nobody here has one, but you know, it's a pretty major, important American right is to have our guns. Second Amendment. And you don't have to be a far right, alt-right to hold that view. But I do question it in terms of our ethics. What do you think about the right to bear arms or being armed within the context of this practice of not to kill?
I've always, well, not always, but for a long time, held the view that guns and rifles and the like are a tool whose only purpose is to harm and injure, really. And so my view is that having something like that around signifies that there is at least an opening in the mind to the possibility of killing and harming, whether it's a person or an animal. And so how can you practice the ethical pathway of non-killing when there is that attitude in the mind? And so that's kind of the way that I look at it.
I'm really not opposed to the Second Amendment. But I am opposed to kind of like the power of the media and what really happened with the gun producers and these videos and these laws that went into effect. There's like this whole kind of masterminding of building fear in people to the point where people have gotten killed because they've instilled a sense of fear in people all the time. So they feel the need to have a gun and they feel like they're being threatened a lot of times when they aren't. And this has actually been a mastermind project that has been documented. People have written books about this. And this is what I have a lot of opposition to. It's just the frailty of human beings to these kinds of media pressures that are based on greed. So that's where I have a really big difficulty.
Yeah.
I think that those things should be brought out in the light as much as possible. And there's a lot of information about this if you look for it, about how this came about in all 50 states and stuff like that.
Yeah, thanks. Ryan?
To piggyback on what Venerable Tarper was saying, I've owned guns my whole life up until now, and I base that on the same type of fear, the fear that if someone comes into my house, then I need to protect my house, and we were raised that way. And I didn't use my personal ethics for that. I used what the law would tell me as my ethical code. So saying that if somebody comes onto your property, you're able to protect yourself. That being said, if I was to have to kill somebody, that would have ruined my life. I mean, that I wouldn't have been able to continue to deal with things. You know what I mean? In a well way. And like she was saying about the greed, I think that capitalism has to do with a lot of the way that it would be easier to practice non-virtue now. We don't have, we don't have any sort of, everything is money driven at this point, and so everything goes back into that. But yeah, I would base, whatever ethics that I had on what I was allowed to do instead of what I personally thought of or wanted to do.
And where are you now?
I mean, that's not the same type of person that I am.
I know.
And things are completely different. The way that I would deal with things are different. I won't own guns anymore. And that had put me in a position to, to be enemies with people, always. You know what I mean? If I have guns in my house, people are continually my enemy. Anybody who might accidentally come into my property or knock on my door, or even if somebody was to steal something, if somebody comes into your house, that doesn't necessarily mean that their life should end. I mean, it's a crazy thing for me to be the judge and jury of that, and to, in a split second, decide that this human being has to die over nothing, over something that I bought, and that's when I really think about that, I mean, that's a crazy way to live. And but America's been brought up that way, and it's instilled in fear. I've never had anyone bust into my house, but I had assault rifles in my house. I mean, that's, it's crazy.
Yeah.
I also think that there's another layer of this from back a ways. When I think about my father and his relationship with guns, how he learned how to use them in World War II, and how if he hadn't known how to or had them, he would have died. And so it's that kind of a mindset that then is taken into another environment that doesn't have that same kind of situation at all, but yet you're still relating to guns and safety and, got to protect in that same way.
Right, right. So it's not even so much the act of willfully wishing to harm, but the potential is always there because of the danger issue. Yeah. So what can we do? Let's look at it let's turn it then. So we have this precept where to practice the virtuous pathway that's the opposite of this, then we cultivate a wish to really nourish life, to support life, to protect life. So how do we practice that in a way within this environment? What are ideas for how we really actively practice that opposite, that virtuous pathway? Yeah. Go ahead.
Well, for me, one of the ways that I practice it is I stay very mindful of any living being in my environment, and work very hard not to step on and kill. And I do that by putting myself in the perspective of the insect crawling on the ground. It would be like a giant coming and walking by me, and so I get myself into that mind space, and then I'm very connected to that living being and understand that being wants to live just as badly as I do. So just in those ways.
Yeah. Sally?
A couple of things went through my mind. One is that for myself, I want to understand reality and not my imagination of what reality is. And understand that this one life is not all there is to my existence. I've been here a long time before in many other forms. I'll be here a long time after in many other forms. And this is just one blip passing through the screen of life for me. So that's one side. And I try and respond to that each day as I come up with the things that scare me in my own life. I try and come back and sit with it from that perspective. so that it never appears as big as I think it is initially, the issue or the problem or the fear that I'm experiencing. The other thing is to offer other beings freedom from fear. And that's one of the things we can, that's a form of generosity. That's the practice we do, and that's what we're talking about here.
Yeah.
We're doing the generosity is the first paramita. So you practice the generosity of giving freedom from fear, not just protecting others, but giving them the freedom from fear. So you create the circumstances where beings are not fearful around you.
I used to own guns too. I hunted before I took even the 5 lay precepts. I used to hunt fish, trap mice. I raised ducks and chickens for meat and eggs. And when I decided to live by the 5 lay precepts, I stopped fishing and such. But something that really struck me strongly was I stopped killing mosquitoes. And I would let one land on my hand and walk outside and blow on them and let her go, you know. And I thought about just how that affected my mind. Here I was being a lot more gentle with this creature. And in the past, I had really exaggerated the harm that a mosquito was going to do me. Now, sometimes I'll let a mosquito bite me rather than go to sleep in a room with a mosquito buzzing me.
Yeah.
Then they're done, right? But I had been previously responding to something that annoyed me with fatal violence. And it was a while later that I really got rid of my guns, and actually I was going to sell them, and then some venerable children told me someone's going to use those to kill something with, right? And so I dismantled them and bent them up and burned the stocks and stuff. And I found homes for my birds, vegan homes.
Yeah, thank you. Part of what's so beautiful about the sharing is to see how our minds change, can change, do change. We do change. It's the nature of our mind to change. So there's always that hope, right? Always. Yeah.
There's a switching to vegetarianism.
Ah, yes.
I think that's a really good way to protect life,
Yeah.
although it's difficult.
Yeah.
It was for me.
Was it? Yeah. Yeah. So switching to vegetarianism, yes. I told you.
Yes, in my view, banning weapons for civilians and citizens is not enough, but we have to also ban weapons for all the criminals and governments and military as well, in order to make true peace.
And I thought Venerable Tarpa brought up a good point too about how the media works hand in hand with the weapons industry, almost like normalizing use of guns as glamorous, or kids play with guns. I grew up around a lot of boy cousins where it was normal to shoot each other and die, and it was funny or fun. So just rethinking ways we educate kids, or what's available as play, right?
Yeah.
I spent hours shooting zombies.
Yeah.
For what?
I spent hours too playing war when I was a kid. Yeah. Our dolls were the bodies. Okay. How about stealing? Let's go on to the next one. Taking what hasn't been freely given. That's the destructive pathway of action, negative pathway of action. So how do we do it now? I mean, so there's the breaking and entering activity of robbing somebody's house. I liked what you said about why do I need to kill someone because they take something I bought. That's an interesting thought, right? It's our stuff we're protecting. And so, and I always, when I think about this negative action of taking what hasn't been freely given, I always think of hungry people stealing a loaf of bread. It's like, wow, that's a tough one. Someone has children to feed and not the money to feed them. And yet, it's still a destructive action, right? But there's so many other ways we can steal these days. I mean, embezzling is the one that often comes to mind, but you have to be in a certain kind of job to be an embezzler. Anybody can walk out of on a restaurant tab bill. That's easy to do. Anybody can sneak into the second half of a movie. Yeah, taxes. Not what about parking? Stealing parking places? Yeah, not paying to park. Yeah. What are other ways that we can do that? What? Not paying to park?
Like with torrents, or like I steal books, steal movies, steal music, steal, and I don't even think that it's stealing. You know, in my head, it's really hard for me to decide that I'm going to pay for an album in today's day and age, because it's you can download anything, any book that I had to in school, anything of that nature. It takes 15 minutes to download. And so that's something, now that I took precepts, that's something I really have to think about when I get back on the internet and do those sort of things, because, the amount of money that it would have cost me to fill the hard drives I have with the stuff that I have, I'd have to have 30 jobs.
Yeah.
People steal ideas from each other, like at work, taking credit for work that you didn't do, taking credit for coming up with a project idea that was not yours, taking things from the internet and claiming that you wrote them, put them up in your school paper, and not giving proper credit. So things like that.
Yeah. Yeah, it's also lying.
Stealing identities. Evidently, this is big business, and my sister keeps insisting, don't use your debit card because it's so easy to steal an identity using cards like that.
Huh. How about it when we, I come up with this often about needing to find a photograph for a visiting teacher, for example, and just pulling the photo off the web. Cannot. But we do. I write. Can we use this photo? They always say yes, but the temptation is there. The picture's there. You need it. I see how easy it is. Personally, I see how easy it is. Yeah. It's easy to do. So, how do we practice to counter that in our own experience?
Contentment.
Which means what? What is contentment?
I don't really need that. I need my honesty more than I need to steal something.
Yeah.
Being content with what we have and with going through proper channels to get what we need.
Yeah.
I think it's also an opportunity, like I'm thinking of your image of the picture stealing off the internet, but really you can use any example. Rather than stealing it from someone else, what you do is you create a network or group that you share amongst, and you have agreements of what you can share amongst. So it isn't stealing. It's done by agreement.
Good point, Sally. Just have to think ahead and be organized. Yeah.
Another thing is to, like, often in life, sometimes you'll see somebody walk away and leave an article of something, or, a purse or whatever, and you run after them and, give it back to them. Or you get change from a cashier and they give you too much and you give back.
Yeah. Not, it's my lucky day, I just got a 20 back that I didn't. Yeah. Other ways to practice the virtuous action of caring for others' property.
I think just thinking about that, everything that's here in the community, everything has been offered by our supporters, and that it belongs to the Song of the 10 Directions. Whether we use it 15 times a day, we use it only once in a blue moon, it still belongs to so many beings. And so sometimes I get really indifferent about that, or I just get mindless about it, and things break, or things I forget where they are, or I don't take care of them, or I don't clean them properly. So I think that's a kind of stealing that's a very slow process of disintegratedness that doesn't really have to happen. It's just my lack of mindfulness that seems to speed that along. So remembering that everything that's here is very precious, owned by the Sangha of the 10 Directions and not by just one person.
Yeah, good point. Venerable Samchen?
The Abbey isn't a national park yet, but, you know, a lot of people go into parks and they see a rock, and it has to be theirs. And so we don't have this mind, it goes back to what you were saying, you know, just appreciating what we see and enjoying it in that moment, and not feeling like I have to take it home. And I have a friend who really didn't practice that so well, and, you know, filled his home with rocks and all kinds of things that just bring more misery. Then you've got all these things you need to protect with security alarms. So just appreciate the things that we see that are beautiful.
Okay, so let's move on to the third one, the third physical one, which is engaging in, from the negative side, engaging in unkind and wise sexual behavior. So is that easier to do these days, or no?
Well, and there's not so much emphasis on marriage. You know, people have many partners, and it's normal. I mean, yeah.
Well, you know, that's really debatable, though. I think this is a. I mean, this whole topic is quite. People talk about it being culturally influenced. You know, consensual sex among people. What's the problem?
Well, consensual is, you know, there's a lot of leeway.
Yeah, there's a lot of leeway in consensual.
And I mean, if both people have bad motives, that, you know, that doesn't make it right just because both are using each other.
Yeah. I mean, they're the obvious ones about,
I was just thinking that, like, you know, 50 years ago or more, it might have been more culturally acceptable for particularly men to be able to have relationships outside of marriage, and than it might be now in terms of just allowing, like, to have multiple partners or stuff like that. Whereas, I don't necessarily think it's worse now than before.
I think I missed your first sentence. You think 50 years ago it was culturally
50
more
or even
accessible? More acceptable?
More acceptable for, maybe even just like thinking more than 50 years ago, like in certain cultures it was acceptable for particularly men to have multiple partners aside from their wife, whereas that would still be, and the women necessarily might not be able to do much about that. It's just kind of what is, and to put up with it. Whereas now I think that it's not necessarily so acceptable.
Yeah, it might be cultural. Yeah.
I can't really speak to this one, and maybe some of the younger people in the room can, but there are all these apps now where you can rate people according to their looks and see if they're in your neighborhood. And, you know, there's this whole thing going there. Anyone know about that?
Been there? Or Tinder? Yeah.
Well, maybe one thing I do think is positive that has shifted culturally is that child marriage is largely outlawed. I mean, that was really the norm for a long time.
That's true.
Or arranged marriage, or, you know, marriage was a economic transaction for your family, could end violently. Yeah. So, and then much more awareness about abuse within the marital situation.
Yeah. Yeah. So how do we practice wise, kind, sexual behavior? Yeah, ordain is one way. Practice celibacy is one way. I think the kind part is what's important. Kind in relation to, you know, being aware of the feelings of others, being aware of our own feelings too, being kind to ourselves in that way also.
I think also to get in contact with our desires. I want me, I want to feel good. and I just grab outside whatever I can. To really be in contact with what do I need here? What is needed under that? Because often we just follow our instinct and that desire, and we do a lot of harm by doing this. So get in contact with that and question it.
Yeah, that's a good point too. I mean, and I think we have to also question then what we've been fed by society as well. As long as we have a society that says the highest form of happiness you can have is sexual, or maybe relational, depending on what crowds you're running in. But then also, the only way to actually measure your worth is by being sexually attractive or sexually whatever. That's pretty slippery stuff, but it's very much a part of our culture. So, examining that, do I agree, and where do I agree with that?
If I think about using your sexuality wisely and kindly, the only way I can really kind of envision it is for consenting adults that are on the same page. Because to me, there's so much variety in what people are looking for and what they want. And this, I think, is almost impossible to do. It would take a lot of communication. What I don't think is that, in a way, even though if people are married, I was just, for someone to say, oh, I really never thought about how that would be for the other person. I've heard that. And people who have been in marriages, or it doesn't matter, in relationships for long times, that's like amazing to me.
Yeah.
I can't really categorize as kind and wise sexual activity, but knowing how diverse people are, I think that you kind of got to find someone of your own interests. But I don't know that I see that as being a very viable thing, because I don't see people's communication skills to be that good. And as a friend of mine said, a young woman who was recently married, I used to work with, and when I became a Buddhist, we were talking about this precept, and she's married and didn't have any kids at the time, and she said to me, I don't actually think it's possible to use your sexuality wisely and kindly. I thought that was really interesting to hear from someone who was young, married, sexually active. And she just thought, it's kind of like how do you put lust together with that? That was, it was a little, I thought, at least having that awareness, I think is helpful. Is helpful if you're of the same bent. Yeah. But, a lot of people are never going to want to think like that. Yeah. So I can't also say that they're not necessarily using, I don't know, it's hard to say what they're doing. Yeah. But it's a tall order. Let's put it that way. That's my thought.
So actually I want to move on because now we're running out of time. And the speech ones are even juicier. And we've spent a lot of time on the physical ones. So the four non-virtuous pathways of speech are lying, divisive speech, harsh speech, and then idle talk. So lying has taken on a whole new panache. I don't know. It's up to a whole new level, and it's gotten increasingly confusing about what's a lie and what's not a lie, because there's so many lies. Right? It seems, at least in the public. So how do we deal with that? We as practitioners, how does lying come up for us? And then how do we practice speaking truthfully? Let's do a few of those and we'll move a little bit faster here.
The urge to lie comes up most frequently.
The what?
The urge to lie comes up most frequently around the wish to conceal. It's like, I did something I didn't want to do and I just want to cover it up.
Yeah.
So I think to overcome that is just to be very, be very upfront and seeing the benefits of just being open, and also to just be more careful about doing things that I don't want people to know about.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Covering up mistakes, real or imagined. Don't you think? Things that we are ashamed of that really aren't so shameful. That's where our confused mind gets in there sometimes too. Lying about things that we don't even really have to lie about. I think that comes up a lot.
Certainly as a parent, I'm very aware of having lied to my children in the short term. Oh, you can't do this because of that. Down the road, it was much better that they didn't do this, and not just because of that, but because of the other three things down the road that they would face as a result as well. So it's lying short term for a long term benefit, but it's still lying.
Yeah.
It's still deception.
Yeah. Yeah, tricky. Double-Jig may have something.
I think when the self-centered attitude gets fired up, it's easy to start exaggerating and to really pay attention to what the body feels like when one is in that place, to be very mindful and careful about, what you're saying.
Right, so what would we be watching for? What would the body be feeling like if we're into that mode of
There's kind of
exaggeration?
a adrenaline zingy, not huge, but it's there, zingy feeling. It's a mind that's really consumed about me, not anything other than me, I think.
Yeah, yeah. So then what about truthful speech? How do we practice that? How do we live that? How do we overcome that in ourselves consciously?
I think the thing that helps the most is to slow down, number one, and think about, why I'm going to say what I'm going to say. And just having that habit, there's a lot of things I never say. So I think that's one way to kind of approach it.
Yeah. I think that doing 3 months of silence, or however many months of silence we do every winter, is a tremendous training for paying attention to what we're about to say. Because when we're trying to keep silence, you have to notice, why am I just broke the silence, or why, or what do I need to say what I wanted to say? I think it's very helpful. Over the years, it accumulates. We see the benefit. And then Pema.
So I think just even doing a short weekend silent retreat is helpful. We have
That's
one
true.
coming up.
That's true. We have one coming up. It's kind of full.
Yeah, because the first retreat I ever did as a layperson was silent, and for the first time I saw how much of my personality is fabricated by just talking, and what I could see, I could drop it and relax, and that was a huge help.
Good insight. Good, Venerable Pema.
I think to start with being honest with your internal speech to yourself.
So really questioning whether we're telling ourselves the truth. Good point. Venerable Yoshi?
Venerable Chocho brought a good point once about when we lie, we lose the trust of others. And it's a very not good feeling inside. And you feel isolated from others. It's really not a good feeling. So to think about that.
To use that thought as an antidote?
Yes.
Recognizing that it doesn't feel good.
Yes.
Yeah.
To stay connected with others, to build a confidence, a trust. I think it's very important to think about that.
Yeah. Trust is key.
Yeah.
Yeah, Roger has something.
So I think for me, what helps me at times to be honest with people and myself. For example, sometimes people might ask me of my plans, and I might not feel comfortable sharing that. So I will instead talk about things that I'm doing at the moment and things that I have done, instead of lying about what the plans are because I feel uncomfortable telling them.
Yeah.
Hard to do at times, but I've been getting better at that.
Yeah. So not answering their question directly, but saying something that is truthful.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Let's go on to divisive speech. Yeah. So the second one of divisive speech is so easy to do. So easy to do. It's easy to do verbally. It's easy to do in print. It's easy to do to people's faces. It's easy to do behind people's backs. It's easy to do and not notice we've done it. Do you agree? This one is an easy one, a path to follow. So what are some examples of how we do it? Or how it's enhanced by our access to the media these days? Do we notice when we're engaging in divisive speech in the moment?
I think for me, a lot of times, the kind of basis of divisive speech starts with this idea of something externally referenced, them out there, me in here, and then it goes from there. So if I'm living from that place, then that's how the speech is then follows, it seems like.
Mm-hmm.
So that externally referenced mind
Yeah.
is kind of the basis for that, I think.
Us and them.
Yeah, us and them.
Yeah. And I think, one of the things I have observed that's really helped to change since I noticed this is maybe a learned family thing, that it's a bonding thing then. Let's talk about that person because we're in this together. You and I, we're cool. That person, not. So, you feel connected and close and we created negative karma together. How great. We'll be in the hell realms together. Yeah, Venerable Seppo.
I read in one Lamrim text that one of the outcomes of divisive speech is loneliness. So for anyone who suffers with loneliness, that might be something to pay attention to.
That's the
I
karmic
took
result.
note when I found that in the Lamrim text, and it worked for a while to help me to really be more mindful. The other thing that I notice is that if I've had judgments running in my mind and I haven't dealt with them, as soon as I hear someone say something about someone, I'm more likely to pipe in and add my 2 cents and what I've observed if I haven't dealt with, transforming that in my own mind first. And
Yeah.
so that's a good reminder
Yeah,
for me.
that's a good point. So we're running out of time, and what I really want to get to on this one is how we contribute to harmonious speech. Especially in light of, I don't know if anybody is going out to protests in the next little while. There is, by the way, a training, a video training at 5 o'clock on Sunday. I signed us up for it on how to react or respond to hate speech and so forth. Everybody's welcome to join us. But from our own experience and from our own practice, especially in these days when there's so much negative speech flying, how do we bring a practice of harmonious speech, speaking kindly? How do we bring that out?
I think one thing is just to see the disadvantages of divisive speech, to see how that disrupts harmony, and to see that avoiding that leads to harmony. Especially like here, we're trying to all get along with each other and live in a harmonious, and you can see that. If you engage in divisive speech, it's harmful to the community, and if you avoid it, it helps to be part of what's creating harmony.
Yeah.
For me, it's been about finding skillful ways to voice my discomfort if people are speaking negatively about another group and I don't agree with the ideas. Not to keep silent, but say, "Oh, I'm not comfortable with this discussion." Or as a teacher, I was a language teacher, so anytime people used racist or sexist terms as an insult word, I would stop the class and talk about it. Don't be so gay. It's like, okay, wait, we need to talk about how we use our words.
Yeah.
And I felt as an adult, if I just let it pass, then it would be totally okay to the kids. It was kind of funny to call people names. Yeah.
Well, and then there's that whole other practice of turning your mind to looking for positive in others and acknowledging that.
Yeah.
And keeping your mind in that, which is such a wonderful antidote from the mind that is, looking for the negative or the critical or the judgment stuff. So to really focus on and to actually say it out, speak it out.
Yeah, so
to the
looking for
people.
for the good qualities in others and practicing saying them out loud and behind their back.
Yeah.
In front of them and behind their back.
Yeah.
Yeah, rejoicing. And, oh gosh, what went through my mind? It went in and out. Oh, the fine line between, I'm just thinking about the hate speech and how easy, you go to a rally, right? And how easy it is to kind of feel the energy of a crowd getting riled up in the negative way, wanting to throw stones at the people who are destroying our democracy or whatever our point of view is. To hold in our mind the challenge between calling out that which is harmful and to do it in a way that isn't hateful. Tricky. Yeah.
What just popped into my mind was when a bunch of us went to the Women's March.
Yeah.
There was no hateful energy there that I saw or felt.
Yeah.
But it was very clear what people were engaged with and what they were having difficulty with in this society.
Yeah. Yes. Standing for something. as much.
Yeah. But in a really respectful way.
Yeah.
But clear.
Yeah, Venerable Tarpa?
I don't know if you remember when I read that skinny little book about the monk who went back from Cambodia and went back there after the killing fields and all that, and the walks that they did. And this is what comes up into my mind. I watched that video that we were given today about what happened in Charlottesville, and I don't think my mind is too pie in the sky. I think that if people were to walk mindfully, like they do in the Thich Nhat Hanh tradition, and have people who are trained in that and have that energy is palpable to people, and it might not. There's a lot of people who would be immune to it, but I found in that video of that rally that way too many people everywhere were so charged up. I didn't see any calm anywhere amongst anyone.
Yeah.
And I feel like there's a palpable energy. Like Thich Nhat Hanh teach you as a monastic when you go into town, and I do this before I go into Newport. A lot of times I'll do breathing meditation, and I'll just make sure when I'm walking down the road, I have this feeling of calm inside. When I go into the hardware store, I'm not going to rush about getting my stuff. I like to have this feeling of calm. And I feel like that kind of energy is palpable to other people, and it helps things. And you can put it in with your clown one that Venerable talked about today. I feel like what they did when they walked across Cambodia in these places where it was very dangerous, it was really healing for people who had been in horrible situations for decades, for a long, long time. It was really healing. It brought people back to their senses who hadn't been there for a long time. It gave them hope.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you. That's a very beautiful image. And I will say, even as we went to the Women's March, we were quite mindful to go as monastics and not as ralliers, right? But it's a presence that's important, significant.
When somebody's doing something we don't like and we're feeling upset at them or something, so we have a practice of thinking sometimes about their pain. They're a suffering sentient being.
Yeah.
And thus diffusing that anger and seeing their pain. And so then when we hear somebody talking poorly about that person, if we've been doing this practice, we can then share that with them. Say, well, I can see that they're doing that because they're in pain. And that keeps us from engaging in going, oh yeah, I don't like that either, Or you could even say, I don't like that behavior either, but... And then share that with the person of what you do if you're practicing that, then you can share that practice with others.
Yeah, very good point. So we didn't get all the way through all 10. But the antidote, of course, is to what we can do as Buddhists is take precepts. Take them and keep them. So I have permission to read a commitment to take precepts. This is what Ryan wrote about taking precepts. I would like to take refuge in the Buddha, because in him I know there is an example of every quality I want to emulate. Also within Buddha, I see there is a way to liberation of all the things I have allowed to keep me ignorant. I would like to take refuge in the Dharma. Within these teachings, I have a clear-cut instruction how to use the rest of my life. To 1, train my mind in order to find happiness, and 2, as a guide to show me how to help all other sentient beings to be happy as well. I would like to take refuge in the Sangha. In doing so, I will be gaining a community of people all over the world, as well as right around me. I will have a place where I can learn so much from others and have people who can tell me when I'm not doing what is needed. I will have others around me who are on the same path as myself. So by this request, I will take the 5 precepts. I will avoid killing or harming other sentient beings. I want to do this because I want to help all sentient beings and be happy. I will not steal. In doing this, I will feel confident and not regretful. The people around me will trust me, and I will not create karma that will be harmful for the future. I will avoid unwise sexual behavior. This will help me to build my confidence and for me to find value in myself and to others in something other than vanity and carnal pleasure. This has cost me a lot of people and a lot of value in myself. I believe I will gain more trust from others as well as myself by doing so. I will avoid lying. This is also a problem for me, and I have used dishonesty to manipulate others and myself. By refraining from this action, I can build self-confidence and trust from others. I will not take intoxicants. This has been a major hindrance in my life. I have spent many years of my life under the influence. It has cost me more than anything else on earth. The suffering it has brought to me and others is immeasurable. By abstaining from this, I will gain more than I can imagine. Also, others will benefit just as much as I will. These 5 precepts and the taking of refuge is going to be the foundation by which I build a lifelong practice. Very beautiful, very powerful. And that's exactly the foundation that these precepts give us. Okay. So in holding these and practicing the 10 pathways of virtue, we do enact this wish to refrain from harm in ever more subtle ways. It makes the world a better place. Even every single one of us who refrain from those negativities and engage in the practices that are their opposites, are creating peace in our chaotic world. The world is safer around us, and that's what we aspire for. And so I think it's not so helpful to lose faith or confidence in that. Of course, we will slip up. We are sentient beings. We do get overwhelmed by our karma. We do get overwhelmed by our afflictions. But that's not a point for discouragement. That we recognize it, we go, wow, that was a mistake. I'd like to learn from it. And maybe I can't change this mistake right away. But I have the aspiration. And as soon, we learn when we do the 4 opponent powers, as soon as I generate regret, I'm already turning my mind in a different direction. So holding those ideas in mind, I think, helps strengthen us. Then as we watch the news and we watch the videos about, neo-Nazis storming with terrifying torches through the streets of wherever, as we watch, even just, I know my experience of writing our representative this last winter, when the first time the healthcare bill came up and I was writing on her website to protest. But what I saw was a huge list of comments, but people were just destroying her personally. So we engage in our action, but we do it in a kind way. We can do it forcefully and strongly with language that we hope communicates well, but we don't have to do it with hate. And that has an impact. And most importantly, coming back to our own practice, we're refraining from creating negative karma. We are actually creating virtue and merit, and we're creating the causes for being able to have a precious human life. Ethics gives us a human life. Practicing the 6 far-reaching practices contributes to having a precious human life so that we can continue this practice until we become it, until we attain full awakening. Thank you, everyone.